Hey guys! So, something I've been thinking about recently, amidst all this Warner Brothers and Paramount stuff going on, is WB gaming, and specifically the state of DC games in general. When Netflix was still in the running to buy Warner Brothers, they had planned to split the company into two parts, and only buy the parts of it that they thought were worthwhile, which did not include WB games. This added to my suspicion that the reason behind the lack of AAA DC games and new IP games from the brand is because Warner Brothers was always preparing to sell and cutting costs, especially since video games, specifically AAA ones, the quality that we want for DC, have humongous budgets and are huge gambles, especially in this new era of live service games. The last AAA DC game was Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, and based on that alone, yeah, DC gaming is in a pretty bad state. Being a DC fan and seeing the Spider-Man games get sequels, Wolverine, Marvel Rivals, Marvel Tokon, Blade, 1943, Rise of Hydra, and the new untitled Black Panther game, when all we have is the new Lego Batman, which I'm hyped for, but it's nothing new or interesting, to be honest, especially since it doesn't really have the huge roster of characters from the previous games, which really added a burst of energy to those. We had hope for an Arkham-style Wonder Woman game, a chance to really explore her mythos and maybe the big break that her character needs right now, especially seeing the concept art and the fact that it implemented this sort of innovative nemesis system where it could be more personalized per playthrough. It was just so exciting, but as with most things DC, they had to disappoint and it got cancelled years after its announcement. This might be crazy to say, but for me personally, this is one of the worst things to ever happen to DC, I think. Your premier female character who's never gotten the respect she deserves, finally getting a massive scale game comparable to projects that Superman and Batman get all the time, and it being canned, I'm still upset about that. So where does that leave us now? Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League apparently incurred $200 million in losses because of the audience backlash, the critical backlash, bad reviews, not very fun gameplay, and the heaping pile of microtransactions littered throughout that game. The reason for this game's failure, specifically in my opinion though, I think that people are sick of Harley Quinn and the Suicide Squad, all because of one movie that managed to do well besides its terrible quality. We have been subjected to the worst torture imaginable, and that being 99.9% of DC just being Harley Quinn, Suicide Squad, Harley Quinn, Suicide Squad, and the 1% being this whole huge other world of characters that they have being neglected and ignored in favor of the Suicide Squad. If I want to play a DC game, I want the power fantasy. I want to be able to play as a superhero or a supervillain. I don't want to play a looter shooter, and I most certainly do not want to use guns or melee weapons. That combined with the lackluster story and the horrific choices for DLC characters, because who seriously in the whole wide world wants to play as Deadshot's daughter, just a normal random human character? What were they thinking? That being said, however, David Zaslav has said that they're determined to refocus on big IP games such as DC, Mortal Kombat, and Harry Potter, which may give us hope for the future. So what's next for DC gaming? What does it need? First, we need Injustice up and running again. And I know what you're thinking, but Injustice is probably the biggest DC gaming franchise ever that actually showcases the DC world and isn't a Batman project. And I know people have their gripes with the characterizations and lots of other aspects of the game, but Injustice is a huge brand and they sell well, the storylines are high quality, they're enjoyable for DC fans and casuals, and with a big roster they achieve two things. They let people have the power fantasy of playing as all these different superheroes and villains, and they shine a light on lesser known characters to the general public, such as Gorilla Grodd, Atrocitus, Firestorm, etc. We need that third entry, especially since NetherRealm Studios, instead of their usual pattern of alternating between Mortal Kombat and Injustice, decided to move forward with MK1 instead, and we still have no major updates on Injustice 3. There's a lot of information out there which does indicate that the game has been in development for many years, but we still have no concrete announcements or news from the studio itself. I think it is likely to be announced soon though, because DC would want to put its best foot forward post-acquisition in the gaming department, and besides another IP which we'll discuss later on, Injustice is probably the highest profile gaming sort of franchise that DC has that would guarantee sales. Even if it's not like an Injustice 3 or a conclusion to the Injustice world, I could definitely see a different DC fighting game being made by NetherRealm Studios, maybe a standalone one that's more faithful to the mainline story, or potentially a sequel to Mortal Kombat vs. DC, but I think 100% we can guarantee that NetherRealm Studios is working on a DC game as we speak. Second, we need our own Marvel Rivals. And no, I don't mean we need a 6v6 hero shooter duplicate of Marvel Rivals. I mean we need a live service game that people want to log into every day and play with each other. The reason Marvel Rivals is probably the biggest game Marvel has ever had, and likely will last a few more years, is because of a few key things that they got right, that DC games have been missing for the last few years. First, it's very easy to pick up. The mechanics are very beginner friendly, and while they also have a high level of skill expression, casuals can also easily pick up these characters, and casuals and competitive players alike can have fun playing the game. The UI is very user friendly. Usually live service games have like 100 different currencies and missions and loot boxes and luck based pulls and all this crazy stuff, but Rivals has none of that. It's very easy to get into, especially from someone who hasn't played Overwatch. It was so easy for me to just pick up Marvel Rivals. It's also pretty generous when it comes to paid currency too. It doesn't squeeze every last penny from its consumers like many recent DC games have done. All characters are free to play, and free skin tokens and currency for skins is pretty generously given out. It also has a very polished, cool, and unique art style, which adds a lot to the visuals of the game. The characters just look so cool while also retaining their comic booky fun cartoonishness. The most important thing though is that the devs listen to the player base. Player satisfaction and retention is their #1 priority over squeezing every dollar out of players. You may think I'm glazing, but take a look at other similar games and compare that to the level of dev attention and player first decisions that Marvel Rivals makes. The difference is crazy. Now, keeping these in mind, we need our own version of that formula. We need DC Studios to take an already existing concept, whether it be a hero shooter, battle royale, co-op mission-based gameplay, something with a proof of concept where games have survived on that model for years, and translate it into the DC world, like Marvel did with Overwatch. And there you have it, we have our own Marvel Rivals game that we so desperately need. This is so important because I know many people who play Marvel Rivals are casuals, and because of the game, they have gotten into Marvel characters, they've learnt the lore, they've developed a greater interest in the world and wanted to watch the movies and explore the comics. These are great ways to keep the brand in the mainstream and bring new fans into the fold. They're obviously also going to continue to make their cash cow games based on Batman, and I could definitely see a Batman Beyond Arkham style game since that's the logical next step to go after Arkham Knight and Gotham Knights. I would also want to see solo like Batman Arkham style games for most, if not all, of the Justice League members. But right now specifically, I feel like Green Lantern is in a perfect space to get a game. I think his powers lend themselves really well to a video game setting, with the whole concept of different lantern cores and exploring a war between them, each of them having its own like story chapter and maps. I think it's perfect, and I'm surprised it hasn't been explored further, because concepts like Green Lantern, you really need an astronomically high budget to do them in a movie setting. But games nowadays are practically no different to movies, and I think it would be way better to have a really in-depth Lantern Corps War or Darkest Night game. So that's the plan. We need one ongoing live service game with all the aspects Marvel Rivals has, like I discussed, and alongside that we need them to release high quality solo games for main pillars of DC characters that put story and gameplay first and transactions second. Also, we need them to stop with this AI slop mobile game stuff that they have going on. I assume those games are full of microtransactions and for stupid kids to go on their parents' phone and spend money. But it just lowers the quality of the brand. I don't understand why they do it. For the story games specifically, I actually have a few in-depth concepts. First, we need a game centered around the absolute world. We need DC to strike while the iron is hot. My personal concept would be similar to Spider-Man or the Arkham style games in terms of gameplay and just how the game is laid out, but make it only semi-open world. I would call it Absolute Evil or DC Presents Absolute. We would open the game with Chapter 1, centered around a group of villains being established and discussing their joint goals of defeating the new emergence of heroes across the globe. This would lead to Chapter 2, Absolute Batman. And so, we would go through all the mainline Absolute characters with a chapter each, around 3 to 4 hours of gameplay, where we'd see an introduction to the character, their supporting cast, and then a sort of mini story arc, which would conclude in them finding out about the Justice League of Villains being formed and setting off to cross paths with the other heroes. The final few chapters would conclude with our heroes uniting. As for the gameplay, each chapter would have a mix of cinematic cutscenes with open world style exploring the small map local to each hero, and the gameplay would be similar to Spider-Man or the Batman Arkham series, with each character having unique basic attacks and combos they can do on a group of enemies, and a handful of special moves or gadgets they can use as well. In the final few chapters, you would be able to choose who you want to play as out of all the heroes in the final few fights. As for post-game story, we could have a story DLC, but I would also make it so you are free to explore every hero's map with a different hero this time. There would be mini-bosses and side quests to complete in each area. I would also make this game multiplayer friendly for the final few chapters and for the post-game, where you and a friend can play as two different superheroes together. The other concept I have is for Deceased the game. This is what I hoped and wished for Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League to be. It would be similar to Last of Us in terms of gameplay and character-first story. It would follow the Unkillables, Deathstroke, Cassandra Cain, Red Hood, Cheetah, Killer Frost, and Bane, as they fight through the infected DC world. Similar to The Last of Us, the gameplay would be very grounded, but in a superhero fashion as to not lose the hero fantasy aspect. We would want to fight discreetly to not gain the attention of the other major heroes that would be flying overhead. It would also feature cinematic cutscenes between each chapter of gameplay, centering around each character, and would feature flashbacks to their life before the infection started, and we would have a long opening cinematic similar to how Injustice 1 and Injustice 2 have, detailing how the outbreak happened. The gameplay would feature stealth missions, crafting upgrades for each character using parts found, but not as complex skill tree oriented like Suicide Squad or even the Spider-Man games, more simplistic like The Last of Us. Each character would have a set of abilities you slowly unlock through their chapter. For example, Cheetah could smell blood and locate trails of enemies. The game would feature mini-bosses such as gangs or other low-level crime groups that want to harm the group or the kids, and bosses at the end of each chapter with a major superhero threat. It would end in a large third act fight at Poison Ivy's safe haven and have you playing as her as the last unlockable character. So those are my two pitches for DC Gaming Elseworld projects that I think could be really fun and interesting and would put gameplay and characters first, which is what I want since those are the types of games that I really enjoy. But DC really needs to get their shit together ASAP because I love DC and I love gaming and I just want them to succeed. Let me know what you guys think at the current status of DC Gaming and what you think of my pitches, and I'll see you in the next video.